G'day, how are you? I hope you're well. Today we're back in the kitchen and we're cooking delicious skirt steak. Now, many of the same principles apply to skirt as apply to any other prime cut, except what we want with all cuts, but especially skirt, cuts of that nature, is the best possible experience. Because without a bit of forethought and a bit of preparation, we run the risk of it being a bit tough, either through not allowing the fibers to break down ahead of time or overcooking. Either way, either pathway would lead to a not quite hitting the mark and not getting a great experience. And it can be a great experience because it's a beautiful cut of meat and it's packed full of flavor. So the skirt, I guess there's two types of skirts. There's the inside and the outside, and it sits sort of on the belly, sort of inside and outside of the ribs. So it gets a lot of use. There's a lot of connective tissue, and I don't know whether you can see that if I catch the light right, but there are long fibers. Okay, so that's another thing to factor in when you're not necessarily cooking, but when you're cutting. You want to cut across those fibers, or else you're going to be having these sort of long fibers that long, trying to masticate and digest that. So if we cut across the fibers at right angles, the fibers get interrupted and it's a much better experience, which is what it's all about. So to get the best outcome of this steak, what we want to do 20 minutes, 30 minutes ahead of time is to marinate it. And the reason we marinate it is, I guess, for two fundamental reasons. One, the loose structure of this steak means that we can infuse a lot of flavor. It'll absorb a lot of flavor. Those fibers aren't packed neatly together. They're quite loose. And so it's a great opportunity to get some flavor in there. The other reason why you might want to marinate this is to soften those fibers. So what we're actually going to use is a lime-based marinade. And so the acetic acid in the lime, or you can use lemon, or you could use white wine vinegar. There's a multitude of different things that you can use to marinate to help break down the tissue. So we're going to use lime. There's also enzymes in garlic and enzymes in ginger that help ultimately to break down that, sort of tenderize, but you don't want to overdo this. So about 20, 30 minutes is ample, and I'll use that time. So basically I'll marinate for the length of time that it takes for this steak to come from a fridge to room temperature, which is the ideal time to cook it. So without further ado, I want to get into what constitutes the marinade, and it's super easy. This isn't anything too chefy, and it's all ingredients that you can get from your local supermarket or greengrocer. So we've got some ginger and some garlic and some chili and some lime. So collectively, they're going to do those two things. They're going to help to tenderize through enzymes and the acid in the limes, but also inject and infuse some flavor. So we'll start off by roughly chopping some of these ingredients and getting as much juice out of these limes as we can. And all we'll do, I mean, there's different ways you can do this, but I might just leave it in that plate. It's a shallow plate, and as long as I can extract enough lime juice out of this, it'll marinate quite well. If you wanted to put it into a Ziploc bag or any other, food safe bag, you could do that. Foil would do the job. If you're marinating for more than half an hour, which I don't feel is necessary at this point, you might want to put it back in the fridge and then allow for 20 or 30 minutes to come back to room temperature. So fortunately for me and my arm muscles, these limes are fairly juicy. So just rolling them to extract the most amount of juice out of a lime or a lemon. Simple trick. Put it on the board, get your palm and apply a firm amount of pressure down on that board. You'll get, 20 or 30% more juice from that lime or that lemon. So what we're ultimately going to do with this steak is pan fry it in a cast iron skillet. So that skillet is going to get very hot. The steak itself is very thin, right? So you need a very hot pan and expose that steak to the very hot pan for a short period of time. This leads back or feeds back into what I was saying about experience, right? So we don't want a potentially tough steak to be overcooked. The most we want to cook it is medium rare. So we're doing all the things, we're stacking up a few things. We're stacking up tenderizing it through the marinade. We're bringing it to room temperature, that helps. We're gonna have a very hot skillet, that helps. And then we're gonna finally allow it to rest, that helps. So it's about minimizing and mitigating the potential to have a poor eating experience. And with sort of a, let's say for example, an eye fillet, there's less steps for you to do because it's an easier steak to cook with. But I would argue there's probably more flavor in this guy here. Okay, so we've got about 4 limes, 3.5 limes there. Okay, so we've got the limes, ginger, garlic, chili. I'm just going to quickly blitz that. Whoa. I might put it in the food processor. So when you're pulverizing, so it wasn't pulverizing small enough in this benchtop bar mix. The idea with, well, the thing to remember with pulverizing food is that it intensifies the flavor. So as you can see, that is completely pulverized, which is exactly what we want. Okay, that's worked out perfectly. So, as you can see, well, hopefully you can see, we've got plenty of lime in there, we've got plenty of aromatics, we've got plenty of pungency, and so that's going to incorporate into the loose structure of that meat, help to tenderize, give it another 20 or 30 minutes, then we'll come back, we'll rinse off the steak, and then we'll get this cast iron pan, super hot, both sides, nice and quick, allow it to rest, and we're going to have a beautiful marinated, tender, succulent skirt steak. Okay guys, that's been marinating on the bench here for about 20 minutes. Could go for another 5 or 10, but I'm going to call it. There is a risk of marinating too much, so I'm just going to get rid of all that. I might keep a bit of the solid mixture, the garlic, the chili. Okay, let me grab a plate. Okay, so now the treatment comes that mirrors other steaks. Okay, so cast iron pan there, getting nice and hot, plenty of seasoning. both sides. Okay, so once we get a bit of light smoke happening on the pan, we're pretty much good to go. So the noise that we should hear is that. Okay, so it's a thin steak. Again, because of the nature of where it is on the beast and how there's a risk of it being tough, it's not an eye fillet, guys. So it doesn't deserve to be overcooked. So medium rare at the very most. So don't be afraid to cook with some of these cuts. You know, I'm a big fan and have been for a long time. All my life, actually, I was you know, I grew up in pubs in and around London for the first 23 years of my life before I came here. And my dad was a big proponent of offal and sort of unusual cuts of meat. Well, they're deemed unusual, but they're not really unusual. They're only unusual for the Australian palate. But I think it's really important to acknowledge some of these cuts of meat that ordinarily get overlooked, because there's some really delicious flavour in a lot of these meats. And there's also the recognition that an animal has died. So let's not carefully select the ribeye, or you know, the eye fillet, or the scotch, or the rump. Let's respect that animal and go nose to tail. Because in my mind, the sort of the less kind of, I guess, the more unusual cuts yield the better flavour, and you could argue more health properties within that cut or within that joint. So we are nearly there. Last couple of seconds or so. So remember, this pan is super hot. A little bit of butter. Oil, then butter. You don't want the butter in too early because it's going to burn, but it really does add a nice finish to it. And obviously the other thing to remember is the rest time, guys. Probably as important as the cook time, particularly with a cut like this. So I'm going to give that another 30 seconds. And then in this bowl, very simple, green salad, herb salad, bit of mint, coriander, parsley. To that I'm going to add some red wine vinegar. Little splash of olive oil. Some seasoning. Okay, let's get that steak off. So guys, I deliberately placed the steak with the fibres running this way. So going from left to right on a slight diagonal. You probably can't see that, but I'm going to let him do his thing for the next 5 minutes. There's so much heat on the surface of that pan, there's still cooking occurring on the board. So we're aiming for, you know, something close to a medium, rare to medium. Whilst we're waiting for that, I'll just lightly toss this green herbaceous salad. We'll put a generous dollop of that. So yeah, growing up in pubs back home, my mum had this thing for, well, actually it was my dad that had he was often the one with the inspiration or the innovation as to what they should cook, whether that be on the menu or the specials for the day. So he often had his head in sort of French cookbooks, Italian cookbooks. But I don't know whether it was part of his upbringing, but there were often cuts of meat that, you know, I didn't really know what they were. You know, like ossobuco was just this odd sounding name to me. But often the smells of kidney and liver and all those sorts of things were never too far away. You know, every Saturday my mum would make fresh steak and kidney pie. So kidneys, livers, oxtail, ossobuco, all these cuts of meat were very prominent in my childhood. That's my wife coming in through the front door. Come in, babe. Okay, so I'm going to cut this, guy. So a nice sharp knife. And just a reminder, we want to go against the fibers. So again, the fibers are long strands of fibers, so we want to go against those. Hello, honey. It is your lunch. All right. So look in there, guys. Beautiful. So we've gone against the fibers, and so it's easy to chew. You know, you're not chewing the whole, 30 centimeter of fiber. So we'll just transition that to the plate, and then we'll use some of that juice from the pan. And another quick season. And there we have it. Give that a quick wipe down. We've got a very easy, simple skirt steak marinade using lime and the enzymes from the garlic and the ginger. Guys, get amongst it. Don't be afraid of these cuts of meat. They're packed full of flavour, and if done the right way, are absolutely delicious.